She asked. Why do you risk so much? I smiled. Because you are worth every risk. I first noticed her in a quiet corner of the cafe, where sunlight fell in a soft, golden slant across the polished wooden tables. She had this way of occupying a space without announcing herself. Graceful, confident, yet somehow vulnerable at the edges. The kind of presence that makes a person pause mid-thought, as if the air itself is holding its breath. I remember the moment I realized I couldn't look away. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup absent-mindedly, the movement delicate, almost ritualistic. She looked up, and our eyes met. There was a pause, long enough to notice the warmth in her glance, subtle but disarming. Her lips curved just slightly, like she knew she'd caught me watching, and maybe she didn't mind. I was 23 then, painfully aware of the gap between us. Not just age, but experience, the invisible ledger of our separate lives. Yet every instinct in me leaned toward her. I leaned forward, maybe too eagerly, feeling the small brush of her hand against mine when she reached for the sugar. My pulse jumped, though I tried not to let it show. Why do you risk so much? She asked, voice low, a faint tremor threading through the calm. She didn't mean a gamble with cards or a dangerous climb. She meant this. Being here with me. Daring to let someone so young see the cracks she normally hides behind poise. I smiled. Not confidently. Not in a way that brushed off her question. But genuinely, because the truth hovered closer than my words. Because you are worth every risk. The cafe seemed to shrink around us. The hum of the espresso machine softened. The chime of the doorbell felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's story. I noticed the way her hair caught the light, the subtle scent of her perfume, faintly floral, but with something warmer beneath it. My hand lingered near hers, not touching, just hovering in a quiet, unspoken rhythm of proximity. She shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and our knees brushed under the table. I felt the electricity of that contact, sharp and delicate all at once. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. Instead, we held the silence, letting the weight of unspoken words fill the small space between us. She laughed softly at something I hadn't said, my own fault, maybe, but it wasn't dismissive. It was private, almost conspiratorial, and it made me aware of every detail. The tilt of her head, the crinkle at the corner of her eyes, the way her hand hovered near the rim of her cup like she might reach for mine instead. I wanted to ask her everything, all at once, but the moment demanded restraint. The kind that twists your stomach in knots and makes your chest feel both too heavy and too light at the same time. Then, abruptly, the cafe door swung open. A cold gust of wind swept through, tousling napkins and bringing the scent of rain from the street outside. Her gaze flicked toward it, then back at me, sharp, searching, and for a heartbeat, it felt like we were caught in a pause that could stretch forever. I knew, right then, that nothing in my life would ever feel the same again. Not after this. And yet, neither of us moved. The rain had begun in earnest, drumming softly against the cafe windows, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and motion. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around us, cocoon-like, as if the storm beyond could not touch this small, fragile space we shared. I watched her across the table, noticing the slight tremor in her fingers as she lifted her cup. There was a history in those hands, in the careful way she carried herself. I wondered, briefly, quietly, what had made her so guarded. Her eyes, even when warm, held shadows of past disappointments. Men who hadn't stayed, or worse, who had never really seen her at all. And maybe she had learned, over time, that confidence is often a mask for the quiet ache underneath. I felt the same, in my own way. At 23, I carried my own weight of solitude, of choices I'd made too quickly, and a longing I'd barely admitted even to myself. She probably didn't see me the way I saw her, elegant, self-assured, utterly magnetic, but she noticed the little ways I lingered near, the way my attention faltered when she moved closer, even by the smallest fraction of a step. There was a risk here, I knew. Not just the age difference, her life brimming with experiences I couldn't claim, but the quiet judgment of the world. Maybe of friends, maybe of ourselves, if we allowed our own hesitations to define what was acceptable. And yet, despite all that, the pull was undeniable. She leaned forward to retrieve a sugar packet I hadn't noticed was missing. Our hands brushed. It was just a touch, light, fleeting, but it made my pulse spike in a way that was almost embarrassing. She didn't comment, didn't draw back immediately, just held my gaze for a fraction longer than necessary. The air between us thickened. "Do you ever feel like you're missing something?" she asked, voice softer than before, almost a whisper. Her shoulder was just inches from mine now. I could sense her breath, warm against my cheek, and I had to resist the urge to lean closer, to close that small, daring space she allowed. "I think, sometimes," I admitted, the words clumsy. "Sometimes I feel like the people I want to know me never really get the chance." My hand twitched against the table, hovering near hers. She noticed. Of course she did. There was a pause, heavy and unspoken, and in it, something shifted. She let her fingers linger near mine, a tentative, delicate promise of connection without committing to anything more. It was a small, silent rebellion against the careful boundaries we both maintained. For a moment, the storm outside ceased to exist. The hum of the cafe, the warmth of our proximity, and the quiet electricity between us filled the room. I caught her eye again, and this time, she didn't look away. She didn't pull back. And I realized, with a quiet, sinking thrill, that whatever caution we clung to, it was beginning to unravel. The next evening, the cafe was quieter than usual, the clatter of cups and murmured conversations soft, almost intimate. Rain-slicked streets reflected the amber glow of the lamps outside, painting everything in a fragile, flickering light. I sat across from her, my notebook open but untouched, aware of every subtle movement she made. She leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, eyes intent on mine. My own gaze betrayed me. I could barely look away, though I tried. Every time our hands hovered near each other, the air thickened. She brushed her fingers along the edge of her cup, and I noticed the small tremor in her wrist. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, but my own restraint pulled me back. "I didn't know anyone would actually come," she murmured, voice low. It wasn't just about the cafe. I knew she meant me. Before I could answer, the door jingled. A friend of hers stepped in, waving cheerfully. My chest sank. She straightened, a polite smile in place, a brief shield between us. I felt a pang, a mixture of frustration and longing, as the moment we'd been savoring evaporated in the wake of someone else's presence. "Ah, hey," she said, voice light. "This is just my friend." A beat. "Sit, sit." I nodded, feeling the distance stretch again, the electricity dimming just enough to sting. Her friend lingered for a while, chatting about mundane things, and I noticed the tiny, almost imperceptible ways she kept glancing at me, the way her foot brushed mine under the table. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. When the friend finally left, silence fell like a weight. She exhaled, a small, shaky sound, and leaned toward me again. Our knees brushed, then ankles, and my heart kicked hard against my ribs. She moved slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine. The air between us was charged, every heartbeat louder than. "He last. I should probably stop," she whispered, though her eyes stayed locked on mine. There was tension in her jaw, a hesitation I recognized, the fear of judgment, of risk, of crossing an invisible line neither of us was ready to name. I swallowed, my hand inching closer to hers, but stopping short. "Stop," I echoed softly, my voice barely audible. "Because, is it wrong?" She bit her lower lip, eyes glimmering. "Because, maybe it is." For a moment, I felt my resolve crumble. The space between our faces shrank, the warmth of her presence intoxicating. I could see the faint curve of her lips, the way her eyelashes caught the soft light. It was so easy, so natural, to close that gap, to taste the edge of something forbidden. And yet, we didn't. Instead, we lingered, suspended in the tension, inches apart, both aware of how close we had come. My fingers brushed hers again, just lightly, as if testing the line we were towing. Her breath caught, and she didn't pull back, didn't let go. The world outside the cafe ceased to exist. All that mattered was the unspoken electricity, the pull towards something neither of us could yet claim. And still, somehow, we resisted. But not for long. The city outside had gone silent by the time we found ourselves walking together along the narrow streets, wet with rain and glinting under the dim streetlights. The air smelled of ozone and damp asphalt, and somehow, every sound, The distant hum of a car, the drip of water from a gutter, seemed amplified in the space between us. She was close, closer than she'd ever allowed before, and I could feel it with every nerve in my body. Her coat brushed mine as we walked, and there was a hesitation in her step, as if she, too, were aware of the tension threading through the night. I wanted to reach out, to touch her, but each step carried the risk of crossing a line that neither of us had dared to name aloud. "I shouldn't," she started, voice tight, then faltered. I stopped. She turned to face me, eyes wide, caught in the glow of the street lamp. My chest ached at the mixture of defiance and vulnerability I saw there. She took a tentative step closer, and I realized her warmth was tangible now. The faint scent of her hair enveloping me, the subtle brush of her sleeve against my hand. "Don't," I whispered, my voice low, almost trembling, not from fear, but from wanting her so much it hurt. "Don't try to talk yourself out of this." She swallowed, her lips slightly parted. I reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, my fingers lingering against her cheek longer than necessary. Her breath hitched softly, and I felt the quickening of her pulse under my touch. I don't know if I can," she murmured, though she didn't pull back. Her body leaned closer, almost instinctively, drawn to the same magnetic force that held me captive. My hands hovered near hers, trembling with the desire to bridge the final gap. Every rational thought screamed to stop, to step back, to respect boundaries, but the longing that had been simmering for weeks, months maybe, surged like wildfire. "I've tried to stay careful," I admitted, voice low, rough with suppressed emotion. "But I can't anymore. Not when you." I broke off, staring at her, my chest tight with the intensity of everything I wanted to say but couldn't fully. Her hand brushed mine, tentative, fragile, and I felt the spark leap across the tiny space between us. The hesitation, the restraint, all melted in the silent confession of that single touch. "I've wanted this," she whispered, barely audible, leaning closer, eyes fluttering shut for just a moment. Her forehead nearly touched mine, and I could feel her warmth, her breath against my skin, the subtle shiver running through her that mirrored my own. Everything inside me screamed to close the gap, to finally let the unspoken, the forbidden, the long-suppressed desire claim us. And just as our lips were about to meet, as if the universe itself had been holding its breath, a car honked sharply from the corner. The sound cracked the fragile bubble we'd created. She startled, stepping back, eyes wide, heart hammering. I remained frozen, fingertips grazing hers, the kiss that had seemed inevitable now suspended, hanging in the charged air between us. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. And yet, somehow, we both knew nothing could go back to the way it had been. We were sitting on the small balcony of her apartment, city lights flickering like distant stars below us. Rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, but the air was thick with the remnants of storm, damp, electric, alive. I had just reached for my coffee when she stiffened, her hand frozen mid-lift. I didn't tell you everything," she said, voice tight, almost brittle. My pulse tightened instantly. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning forward, though instinctively, my hand retreated slightly, as if sensing that the words themselves were charged enough to shock. She looked away, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Someone heard, someone knows how close we've been." And her voice broke. I might have lied, just a little, to cover it. My stomach twisted. The air between us seemed to thrum, heavy with warning, yet impossibly intimate. Her gaze lifted, catching mine again, vulnerability wrapped in defiance. I saw her chest rise faster, the way her shoulders tensed as if bracing herself for judgment, or worse, rejection. I didn't expect anyone to notice. I murmured, my voice uneven, caught between irritation and fascination. My fingers brushed against hers by accident, or maybe intentionally, and I felt her tremble slightly. She exhaled sharply. "I didn't want to put us in the open. Not yet. Not like this." Her knee brushed mine under the small table, a spark that was both accidental and deliberate. I could feel the electricity leap between us, mingling with the fear, the thrill, and the unspoken longing that had been building for weeks. We sat in silence, letting the tension coil tighter. My hand hovered near her wrist, trembling slightly, the heat of her presence almost unbearable. Her own hand twitched as if wanting to touch, wanting to bridge the invisible gap, yet restrained by caution, or perhaps guilt. "Why did you lie?" I asked softly, my breath brushing against her ear without thinking. She shivered at the contact, her body leaning just a fraction closer, then pulling back, the push and pull of desire and fear made physical. "I didn't want to lose this," she admitted, voice almost a whisper. The words hung between us, fragile and potent, like glass threatening to shatter with the slightest pressure. I leaned in slowly, the motion deliberate yet cautious, savoring the closeness, the scent of her hair, the warmth radiating from her. "We're already at risk," I murmured, tracing the line of her hand with my thumb, careful not to overstep, yet craving more. "Every moment we spend like this, it's dangerous." But my words faltered, choked by want. "I can't stop." Her lips parted, eyes flicking to mine with a mixture of fear and surrender. Our hands brushed again, lingering longer this time. My chest ached as I felt the magnetic pull that had been building since the first touch, the first glance, the first stolen moment in that crowded cafe. And in that charged, trembling silence, we both knew something had to give. One way or another, our next move, would change everything. The apartment was quiet except for the soft patter of rain against the windows and the hum of the city far below. Every sound seemed amplified in the charged stillness. The click of her heels as she stepped closer, the faint rustle of fabric, the shallow intake of breath that told me she, too, could feel the weight of what was about to happen. We stood in the narrow space between the door and the living room, just inches apart. I could see the curve of her jaw, the glint in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands as she brushed them lightly along her sides. My own hands itched to reach for her, to bridge the gap that had held us apart for weeks, but I hesitated, savoring the moment when hesitation itself was an aphrodisiac. "Are we really doing this?" she whispered, voice trembling, low, almost lost in the thick warmth between us. I shook my head slowly, but my lips curved in a half-smile that betrayed everything I felt. "I don't think we cannot," I murmured. My chest pressed against hers, careful, deliberate, letting her feel the steady rhythm of my heartbeat without overwhelming her. Her eyes searched mine, full of fear, longing, and a strange, fragile hope. She leaned in, just a fraction, letting her shoulder graze mine, her breath brushing my cheek. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, something intimate, something utterly her. My hand lifted almost instinctively, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat, and I felt her lean slightly, just enough to test the boundary, just enough to invite the inevitable. "I've tried to fight it," she confessed, voice low, lips parted, words trembling in the air. "But I can't anymore." I let my forehead rest against hers, savoring the heat of her skin, the way her pulse raced against mine. "Neither can I," I whispered back, so softly it felt like it might shatter the quiet tension around us. For a long moment, we just stood there, suspended in a space where desire, fear, and tenderness collided. The world outside the windows could have burned, and we would not have noticed. Every small movement, the brush of her fingers against mine, the tilt of her head, the soft catch of her breath, was magnified, sacred. And then, finally, we let go. Not with a rush, not with precision, but in that messy, human way that feels like falling into something you've been chasing your whole life. We pressed together, not fully, not explicitly, but close enough that the tension dissolved in warmth and shared presence, in the unspoken confession of months of longing. When we finally pulled back, just slightly, breathing heavy, our foreheads still touching, I saw her fully, every guarded line, every shadow of doubt, every flicker of vulnerability. And she saw me, really saw me, not as a younger man, not as a risk, not as a fleeting fancy, but as someone who had waited, silently, patiently, for this exact moment. "We understand each other now," I whispered, voice rough with emotion. She smiled softly, a quiet, fragile thing, and leaned into me again. "Yes," she said, almost reverently. "We do." For the first time, the storm outside didn't matter. The fear didn't matter. Only this, the here, the now, the surrender that felt impossible and inevitable all at once. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, soft and golden, painting the room in quiet warmth. I woke first, aware of her presence beside me, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the faint scent of her hair lingering in the sheets. For a long moment, I just watched her, marveling at the calm, the closeness, the way nothing in the world outside mattered anymore. She stirred, turning slightly toward me, and our eyes met. A soft smile curved her lips, and in that instant, all the lingering fear, the whispered doubts, the invisible walls we'd both carried, they felt miles away. "Morning," she whispered, voice low, husky with sleep and something tender. "Morning," I replied, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. My fingers lingered at her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw, memorizing the familiar warmth that had drawn me to her in the first place. She leaned into my touch, not a step, not a hesitation, just an instinctive, quiet surrender. We moved closer, naturally, effortlessly, until our bodies were pressed together, a long, unspoken embrace that said everything words could never capture. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a gentle firmness that made my chest ache with a sweet, grounding kind of joy. "I was so scared," she admitted softly, burying her face in my shoulder, "of what people would think, of this age difference, of losing you before we even had a chance." "You don't have to be," I whispered, pressing my forehead to hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse. "It's us now. Nothing else matters." Her laughter was quiet, almost shy, but it filled the room like sunlight. "You make it sound so simple," she said, though her hand tightened around mine as if to anchor herself in the truth of it. "It doesn't have to be simple," I said, letting my thumb trace circles on her knuckles. "It just has to be real. And this is real." We stayed like that for a long while, breathing together, touching together, letting the intimacy settle into something gentle yet electric. A closeness that didn't need words to define it. The storm of tension, longing, hesitation, all of it, had transformed into warmth, laughter, and quiet certainty. Finally, she tilted her head up, pressing her lips to my forehead in a slow, lingering kiss that held gratitude, affection, and promise all at once. I closed my eyes, feeling the tension of months dissolve, replaced by a serene, human connection that felt unshakable. We sat together, still entwined, sipping coffee, letting the quiet stretch comfortably around us. Every glance, every brush of skin against skin, was a reaffirmation. We had crossed the boundaries that had once felt impossible, and we had arrived here, together, intact, unafraid. And as we leaned into each other, a shared smile spreading across both our faces, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something lasting, messy, beautiful, and real. Engagement questions for YouTube. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?